Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of AI Diatribe. My name is Jason Lowe. I am your host, joined by two gentlemen today. First off is my co-host, Mr. Matt Konwiser of IBM, and our guest today is Mr. David Tan. So he is the CTO of a company called Crushbank, who has been affiliated with IBM as a consumer of IBM's Watson platform for a very, very long time. So actually, you know what, rather than me doing some sort of spiel and try and introduce you and your company, David, let's turn it to you. Give us the thumbnail version of your progression through life. And then in, what was it, 2016, I think is when you guys started up Crushbank, and how that came to be and the story from there.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you guys having me on. So, very brief history of me. I ran an MSP out here in New York for close to 30 years. Wasn't a managed services company when we started. We started back in 1993, actually. Morphed from outsourced IT to professional services to MSP. In the mid ends, I started to get antsy and anxious and say, what's next? Where do we go from here? And it was right around that time that IBM announced their Watson platform. I loved the technology. I remembered when IBM competed, or Watson competed on Jeopardy back in 2011, and I wanted to play with the tech. So I looked into the program, and at the time you had to apply to become part of the Watson ecosystem. Went through that whole sort of Shark Tank process of pitching an idea. And my idea essentially was to make AI, and particularly Watson, available to IT support techs on the help desk. So that's when we started our journey with IBM. It was not necessarily IBM, but it was the AI technology that was probably pretty early. We had a bunch of ups and downs, a bunch of fits and starts, but probably 2020, 2021 timeframe, things actually started to work better. And then in 22, with the large language models really coming mainstream, we were start to actually get really good quality and really good results. And the idea essentially was taking all of the disparate data that lives inside your organization that's locked up in everything from an ERP to an ITSM to a file repository, ingesting that into a data lakehouse, which we weren't calling it that at the time, but now we talk about it as a data lakehouse, and making it available at the point of support to a tech that's looking to solve a problem. Fast forward to 2022, we sold the MSP and started to really focus on Crushbank full time. And it's kind of been a great ride from there. So we're still fully on the IBM platform, IBM ecosystem. We have since migrated off of what we were using originally to the WatsonX data platform, which gives us the ability to still live inside the WatsonX ecosystem, which is great, but also leverage other cool third-party systems and services. So, for example, we use Milvus and Iceberg as part of our solution. So being able to bring all of those external systems, services, solutions into an AI data platform and make it available to our customers has been a really great journey.
So, David, I think it's also probably a good thing to mention that the three of us know each other not from IBM, but in fact, all three of us are also on the AI Council for the GTIA, formerly CompTIA. And that was actually how I first met you, David, as well,
Yeah,
ironically enough, even though I was at IBM while you were doing all that work.
exactly. And we didn't know each other.
Yeah. So this is important to note because I think we've done this a few times. This is not affiliated with IBM in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of coincidental that you happen to be an IBM consumer and I happen to work at IBM. It's also not directly related to the GTIA. We all just happen to have gotten to know each other through that medium. So I just want to put that out there in case people thought this was going into like some sort of a IBM commercial type thing, which it is not.
No, it definitely will not be.
So here's my question. David, I mean, you have a relatively small business that has a lot of high profile clients right now, and AI is a big part of that, whether it's IBM's AI or anybody else's. Two major things happened this past week, right? So the Pope's encyclical came out. I don't know if you read that. And we also saw Dario and Sam both walk back their job apocalypse predictions, maybe because they have IPOs coming, maybe because NVIDIA said, hey, it's actually more expensive to hire AI than people. And maybe because everybody that's fired all of their dev staffs for AI ended up hiring them all back. But for your business and your business model as a supporting function for organizations, are you impacted by a lot of these fluctuations? Did you have a chance to look at the encyclical or see the announcements at all? And What are your thoughts? Like, are these like major inflection points for you in the AI industry, or is this just a bump in the road?
I think it's a little bit of both. Honestly, I did see the announcements. I did read up on most of that. I think it's a little bit of both. So what I mean by that is obviously our business will flourish when people embrace AI and AI outcomes, but just the use of AI is not exactly what makes us valuable. So what I mean by that is, as our focus has shifted over the years to being much more of a data company than an AI company, because let's be frank, I'm not going to compete with IBM, I'm not going to compete with Anthropic or OpenAI, but I can do a good job of making my clients' data available so that they can build and leverage AI solutions. So yeah, I think people need to embrace it, and certainly that will help, but it does mean no good if people, they start to lay off people and cut headcount and do all that fun stuff. Now, the good news is that we're not a user-based pricing model, so I don't necessarily care about it so much, which is nice. And we do streamline and we do deliver pretty good ROI, which I think is helpful. But it's certainly impactful if people embrace it and start to leverage it, but not so much by the cost cutting and the cost savings. But just sort of to the greater point, I think we're still figuring that out, right? It's true. They walked back there, and I think a couple of other people too. Was it Goldman or someone that came out and said that they don't think the AI job apocalypse is going to be what people were predicting? I don't know that anyone has figured that out yet. And what I mean by that is there's certainly opportunity to streamline operations and cut headcount and leverage AI. But I think we're going to be pretty soon at a point where these businesses have to decide exactly what you said. Should I be investing in AI? Should I be spending the money on AI? Or should I be investing in people? And where do they each return? And the one piece of the calculation that I don't think has fed into that yet is that I am of the belief that the cost to use AI in your business is going to start to skyrocket exponentially once these companies do IPO and have to start returning profits, right? You're not going to be able to light $1 billion a year on fire when you're a public company and you're only charging $20 a month and someone's getting $2,000 a month of utilization out of it. So I do think we need to figure out where we land and how that normalizes. I think there's still a lot to be learned.
Well, and I think that the kind of the bookend on this point that I'll make is, I think Jan LeCun said it best when he said we should have just been listening to the economists. Like why are we listening to tech founders who build like mathematical models? Let's listen to the economists that actually know what a job market is and what happens. So anyway, totally agree with you, but that was my thought. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting because AI is AI. It's developing as it is. We don't know what's going to transpire. We only know that things are changing, and the capabilities of these large language models, specifically as we're talking about generative AI, are changing every day. This is going to release next Thursday, but today is Friday, the week before, and Opus 4.8 just came out. So, I mean, we're seeing these new things happen all the time, and who knows? Maybe Claude Mythos is going to release by the time this particular episode releases. But I think it's really interesting because a lot of people are switching different LLMs. You, for such a long time, were really very Watson central, but now you've kind of morphed a little bit, and you are now kind of a bring your own LLM type of a shop. Would you say would you say that's accurate?
I think that's in our marketing. So yes, I would say that's accurate.
Very good. Okay. So why the strategic shift specifically? Was it just simply because people were asking for it, or was it because there was something that you recognized in those other platforms that you wanted to utilize, or how did that all come about?
So it was a combination of things. So we're still very IBM centric, but obviously IBM is not the leader in LLMs, right? They have some of their proprietary LLMs and they serve a purpose, but they're not setting the world on fire with the new models and things that they're releasing, and that's not the business that they're in. I think for a while, Jason, this is going to come off as sounding a little bit arrogant and a little bit naive at the same time. We thought we could outsmart what people were doing with LLMs, right? So we were building very, very detailed code bases and APIs and instructions and things like that to get the people the results they wanted. And we kind of, I hate to say it this way, we kind of woke up one day and realized, what am I doing? Like, these things are so powerful and so performative. I should just throw the data at it and let it figure it out. Now, we landed somewhere shy of that. Obviously, we have to have a little bit of controls and guardrails in place. But I think a combination of understanding the power of these LLMs as they matured. And I've always been someone that wanted to meet the customers where they work. And I just think people are bracing it in their systems, right? They're using Claude, they're using Copilot, they're using Perplexity, whatever. I just want to plug into that workflow, into that business system, and let them leverage the AI they're already using. So I think as the market matured and as the models got better, I think, I'm a big hockey fan, as Wayne Gretzky would say. I want to skate to where the puck's going to be. And I think I finally woke up one day and realized that's where the puck's going to be.
Interesting. So it's almost like it's a little bit less of trying to commoditize the LLM layer and focus on the data layer, as it's just kind of more making sure that you're able to
Yeah.
serve your customers where they need to be served.
Exactly. And quite frankly, most people don't have a handle on the data layer, right? Like we run into competition from an LLM standpoint. I'm not going to stand in front of a room and tell a bunch of executives that they need to use a certain LLM or work within a certain platform, but I can stand in front of them and explain to them how we can leverage their data. So I think, again, just that realization that these things are out there, people are using them. Let's just help them leverage their asset, which is their enterprise data.
So let me ask you this, and this is kind of something that's been on my mind because I've been in cybersecurity for a while as well. There's a very high profile case a while ago where a hotel was sued because one of their franchise owners was breached. And I think the consumer rights groups basically made the claim that even though it was a franchisee and the systems that were breached were not part of the corporate entity was still liable because the understanding was from a branding perspective, it was that brand. So in a bring your own model situation, could that potentially impact companies that have that policy negatively if a user of Crushbank services who brings their own model ends up using a model that's been impacted, breached, or just is generally not a good choice? And then it ends up in the news because ultimately I think it would be Crushbank's reputation that would be at stake for that, right? So I totally agree with the bring your own model concept and for all the reasons why you're doing it. And that's why, frankly, IBM doesn't have any models, right? We create them through research and publish them on Hugging Face, but we don't own our own models as a profit center. How do you feel about that? Like where do you think the liability needs to sit between the individual customer of Crushbank who brings a model, and if that model happens to be not the best model of choice or causes brand damage, how it limits or exposes Crushbank's liability in that case?
Yeah. I mean, we do have some terms of use and guidelines and restrictions in place, right? So, in other words, we don't let our customers hook up to free plans. And by the way, there's only so much you control here, right? So, if I turn over an MCP server and someone goes rogue, that obviously can happen, but that is a violation of our terms of service and our customer agreement and all that fun stuff. So, I wouldn't let someone use DeepSeek, for example, until I vetted it, or I wouldn't let them use a free plan. Again, let being a bit of a strong word, but that's certainly something we need to be careful of and be aware of. Again, I think the best we can do is try to control the way our customers interact with it. The good news is that for the most part, our customers are so paranoid about that on their own that they will listen to what I say, right? So if I give them guidelines or restrictions like don't use this or you always use a free plan or use that, generally speaking, I have no issue with them going along with those recommendations and following that. That being said, there's obviously the greater risk associated with one of these large companies. They could be breached as well. We always used to have a saying. So before, as I mentioned, I ran an MSP before I started Crushbank, and we used to have clients in our data center, and it was a very large data center based down in Philadelphia, well-known location, tier 4 data center. And we always used to joke that if anything ever happens to the data center, I wanted to make the news because then at least I'll know I'm protected, right? So if a plane God forbid, crashes to the side of this data center and my client's network goes down, they're not going to call and yell at me, right? They're going to see that there's a bigger problem. So if something like that was to happen to an OpenAI or an Anthropic, I think we'd have a little bit of air cover there. So I think that it's really the margins that we need to be careful of, right? People aren't bringing smaller, less known, unvetted systems to play in these type of engagements. And generally speaking, that hasn't been much of a problem.
Now, the other thing I'll bring up, because I was busy getting the poop scared out of me over the weekend. I know this is an uncensored podcast, so I'm allowed to say that.
Poop.
So, yes, which this is not, by the way. So, quick side note, if you've never had it, a glass of tonic water with a shot of espresso is really tasty. Thank you, Elise Burdett. Anyway, so I was playing with Heretic over the weekend. I don't know if either of you know what that is. So Heretic is software that somebody wrote that allows you to pull down any open source model you want and effectively bypass all of the governance and ethics safeguards in it. So no matter how well structured this model is, what it effectively does is it downloads a slew of adversarial prompts. It measures the number of times that the model refuses to respond to the prompt, and then it starts adjusting parameters and weights until it finds a sweet spot of weaknesses where it's able to get the lowest KL score, which for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's basically it's measuring drift. How far off what's expected does this response go? So a very low score, meaning very minimal drift from what's expected, but very few refusals. And it was able to get this model that I was working with, it was highly rated globally for its governance and ethics, down to only about 4 or 5 refusals and a below 0.1 KL score, which is damn near identical to how you would expect it to respond before it had been attacked, but getting it to respond to things that it should never be responding to. So what I think about as well is with the safeguards that you're talking about, with Heretic out in the wild and people being able to bring their own models if they have access to the actual model files, meaning they're not using a service, it really exposes a lot of businesses to vulnerabilities beyond just shadow AI and shadow MCP, because now people could be using valid, legitimate models that have been vetted, that do have really good governance scores in Hugging Face, but have been entirely corrupted. And there's almost no way to really tell unless it starts doing really nasty stuff. So I'm just curious, like for the two of you, from Jason as a consultant and an instructor and a practitioner, and David as a business owner and a CTO of a large business. I mean, is this shocking to you, both of you? Do you see this as kind of changing the landscape, or is this just yet another thing we have to look out for as part of the future?
It's shocking, but not surprising, if that makes any sense, right? I mean, this is evolution. I remember the days, you said you've been in cybersecurity a long time. We did a lot of that as well. I remember the days when all you needed to do was download a script from a server and you could hack pretty much any network, and that evolved over time, right? So the bad actors always outpace the good guys. So I just think it's got to be something that we have to be, hyper aware of and diligent about. But and it's not all that surprising, quite frankly. And I mean, anyone honestly that didn't think that this is what was going to happen probably hasn't been paying attention to history, right? I mean, this was inevitable. People are going to try and figure out how to manipulate these models and get outputs that they weren't planning to get, or they weren't built for.
Yeah, see, and I'm not even shocked, to be honest with you. I'm not even surprised, and I'm not even shocked. One thing that, okay, maybe this is a bad attitude to have, but vulnerability testing is really interesting. You know what the best vulnerability test is for something in the entire world? Release it to the public. The humanity, just for whatever reason, because of our creative way of thinking and the way that we come at problems and issues, we will find any possible vulnerability. We are the worst virus that has ever been on the planet. And we can get into anything and we can do anything. Plus, I hate to say this, but humanity is full of people who are very much motivated by, I just want to wreck things. I just want to watch things burn down. And there is not an area of the planet. There is not a vertical. There is not a practice area. There is not a hobby. There is not an ecosystem that doesn't have some small contingent of, I want to burn this frickin' thing down. And so am I surprised? No. I'm not. It's sad. It was inevitable, like you say, but it had to happen.
Well, I think it also exposes the issues of open source, right? Like people can only run that system against something where they have the tensor files, where they actually have the raw model files. If they're paying $100 a month for Claude or Gemini or whatever else, they're never going to have access to those files. They can't do that to those models. So now you've got the interesting balance of, we've always been saying, and I personally have always said open source good, open source always good. We should always be open sourcing everything. But now we're seeing that I think the bigger gap becomes AI literacy. Because if you're not AI literate and you're using open source models and you don't understand how things like Heretic could work or how a model could produce bad results, you're creating a greater vulnerability for yourself, the model, and the business. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I stand with this. I agree with you. I don't think it's surprising. I do think it was a little shocking because I honestly expected it to fail miserably on the model I ran it against, and it succeeded hilariously well. And it only took my poor MacBook Air about 12 hours to run 200 trials to give me the results. But I do see the whole landscape changing, right? And I think we have to be very aware as humans of all of this technology. So let me ask you this again to kind of both of you: AI literacy, being aware of the fact that you can manipulate a model in this way, understanding that governance and ethics is not something that's currently built into the base model, but kind of a set of layers and filters on top of it that can be corrupted and broken and removed. How important is AI literacy, and what depth do people need to have in order to be kind of approved as users of it for your respective areas of business?
I want to make a point on the previous bit as it relates to open source, and that will lead into my response to your question there, Matt. And that is that open weight is not open source. We're not talking about the exact same thing, right? Open source software is certainly good because then the community can work to try and find vulnerabilities and make it better for everybody. Open weight, it's just not exactly the same. There's still a black box element. And so you're just kind of trying to sand and roughen the edges of the model to work the way that you want it to and to fit in the type of thing. You're not actually modifying any code. And open source works well because of community awareness, and open weight, it could end up getting to the point where community awareness will promote that. But how is it that you're going to be able to certify that the weights of this model are what they are intended to be? I don't know. Maybe there will be some sort of a hash signature or something like that that'll be involved with making sure that you're dealing with models that are very valid. But as it relates to AI awareness, that's where open source is good, because those people that need to know that this open source stuff works and works well and that this is being supported by the community, they know it. There's still a level of technological difference between people in the technical world. You have a whole bunch of people that are in the technical world that don't have a freaking clue what open source means. All they know is that it's something that's free and available, and so they probably think it's freeware or shareware. They're not, really familiar with the concept of having all of this code and stuff being published openly that you can actually go in and you can inspect and try and find vulnerabilities in. So there's different levels of literacy all over the place. And it's kind of interesting the way that you put that question, Matt, because cybersecurity right now, the biggest push in companies is less about actually patching the holes and putting up the shields, and it's more about educating the employees and making sure that they are aware of what's going on with cybersecurity and security in general, so that they can't be socially hacked or dumpster dived to the point where some things could be used to get in on someone's network or into someone's computer terminal or something like that. I mean, there's this whole element of you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be cognizant of what you're doing that could be exploited by somebody else in the cybersecurity realm. We're going to hit the same thing with AI. I truly believe that companies are going to need to institute AI awareness training just as much as they're going to have to continue to have cybersecurity training. But that's just my perspective.
I completely agree with that, Jason. AI literacy is an interesting question. So what I mean by that is, let's say, I'll use one of my use cases. You have a level 2 tech that's using Claude, and they're tied to my MCP server, my data lake, and they're getting answers, right? How important is it for that person to truly understand how it works? So they ask a question and it thinks and it reasons and it gathers information that we all know that's not what it's doing, right? It's running a very complex series of mathematical calculations and pattern matching and statistical analysis and all that fun stuff on the back end, right? And I don't know about you guys, but when I hear someone say like, oh, I can't believe how smart it was and how well it thought through this problem, like, no, it didn't do that, right? That's fine. And it just bothers me as a tech sometimes, but I've learned to move past it and not correct people. But to your point, Matt, if you can get people that much more literate on how this black box actually works, they can probably be a lot more prepared, Jason, like your example in the understanding of the risks and the dangers. that also may be a zero-sum game, right? So I don't necessarily know that there's the capability or the value in training people, but we also need to make them aware enough of how this works so that they're not doing stupid things and making mistakes, right? Kind of like in the traditional world, you didn't need to know how a firewall worked. You just knew that a port wasn't open. You didn't need to know how an application worked. You just knew there was a database behind it, things like that. So it's a
Right.
little bit of a delicate balance that we need to walk. I think that the biggest difference here is AI is still looked at as so mysteriously, and to the untrained eye, the things it does are so amazing that they just want to sit back in awe and say, wow, I can't believe how smart it is. But that's just not really the case, as we know. It's just become incredibly capable.
Matt, you haven't offered your thoughts on this. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I just did a talk this morning to an elementary school, and it was originally just supposed to be fifth graders talking about what AI is. And I used actually Nami's book. I brought it with me and I
Nice.
read from it.
For those that are listening, that's Nama Shakurian, who was a guest on our podcast 3-4 episodes ago.
Yeah, very, very well versed in child safe AI systems and programs. And she published a book in the UK that'll be, I think, available worldwide later this year. So AI literacy is really important. But I think, again, it's not about understanding, open weight versus open source. I don't think it's necessarily understanding parameters and, KL variants and things like that, but understanding what it is and what it isn't. So do you know how I explained it to third graders and fifth graders today?
Do tell.
I played hangman. So I drew 3 dashes on a whiteboard, and a couple of the kids jumped up immediately and said, hangman. It's like, okay, I wasn't going to call it hangman because I didn't know if that was appropriate for third and fifth graders, but apparently it is. I didn't draw the little gallows and everything, but I said, give me a 3-letter word, but you have to guess the right word. And they were like, well, I don't know. And I said, well, how many 3-letter words are there? So I asked one of the kids to take out a dictionary and start counting them and let me know when he was done. And obviously I cut him off like 3 seconds in, but I said, let me give you a hint. There's a lot. So I'm going to give you a theme for what this 3-letter word could be: animal. And I said, but here's the thing, because you guys are my AI, you can only guess the first letter. And so they went through the whole alphabet. Finally, they got to B. And B as in boy, that was the correct answer. It was a B. So I'll ask you guys, what is a 3-letter word animal starts with the letter B?
Bat.
I was going to say bat too.
Not bat.
Boa.
Oh, that's a good one. But no, it wasn't boa either.
Bug.
Nope. It's so funny because to me, it was instantly obvious, but I guess it's not. What is 3 letters but only 2 letters?
B. B.
B. B. Yeah, it was a B. So that's the buzz. Anyway, I got them to realize that guessing the first letter was incredibly hard if you don't know what the topic is. It's a little bit easier when you know what the topic is, but it's really easy to guess the second letter once you know what the first letter is, and it's stupidly easy to guess the third letter once you know what the second letter is. And I said, that's how generative AI works. All it does is try and get the right letter correct in rapid succession, and it does that for letters in a word, words in a sentence, sentences in a response. That's how it works. So understanding that is something I think everybody should do. And I would venture to guess, just from my experience talking with people, even people at my own company, probably less than 50% of the population understands that.
Oh, it's way less than that.
I was being kind, but I totally agree with you. Anyway, so I think AI literacy is really important to disarm a lot of people about the concerns and fears of it. But that's my thought. AI literacy is vital, but not bits and bytes programming math, but functionally speaking, what it is, how it does. If you can explain it to a third grader, you're good enough for me. You've got literacy. But I want to go back to the first thing you said, Jason, which was talking about open source versus open weight. So the Open Source Initiative, which is a worldwide group that defines open source for lots of different things, did actually publish a definition of open source AI. And it's 4 bullet points. So I'm going to read those. And I want to ask you, I'm going to challenge you to say, does it change your opinion on how you feel about open weight versus open source as it relates to AI? And David, I would love to know your thoughts on this as well. Based on this definition, do you agree with it? And do you think it will help or hurt businesses who are adopting bring your own model concepts? And also, how does it impact AI literacy and using AI? So here's the 4 points. Number 1, use the system for any purpose and without having to ask permission. Number 2, study how the system works and inspect its components. So nothing is hidden. Everything is fully transparent. Number 3, here's where we get interesting, modify the system for any purpose, including to change its output. And number 4, share the system for others to use with or without modifications for any purpose. So what's so fascinating to me is they've taken the concept of a well-governed, ethically bounded open source model and basically said, that's a starting point, but nobody has to comply with it. You can do whatever you want and then you can share it. And oh, by the way, if it's truly open source, whoever made it has to make everything visible to you. What do we think about this? Is it with something as potentially dangerous as generative AI, is that a good definition of open? Or is it going too far?
Well, it's just a definition. I don't know that it's necessarily something that's going to govern what people do or how they do it, but I mean, I think it's a valid definition. It's completely devoid of moral guideline. It's completely devoid of ethical guideline. It's just simply something that's, being put in place to be a framework for how do we think of open source. David, what do you think?
I mean, it's interesting. I have never seen that definition before. Obviously familiar with who the Open Source Foundation is. I'm a little surprised because it feels like they're trying to put a round peg, a square peg in a round hole, right? They're trying to make open source AI fit into the definition of open source software. And it probably just shouldn't, right? Like, I want to know what goes into the model. I want to know how it's built. I want to understand how it works if I'm going to use it for especially business outcomes. But I don't think people should have the ability to change how it's governed or what guardrails are in place or things like that. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that is the best definition for us to be working under going forward. I think that leaves a lot of opportunity for malicious behavior.
Matt, repeat that second bullet point.
The second bullet point. The
Very
second
good.
bullet
Big
point
one,
is
right?
study how the system works and inspect its components.
Interesting. And isn't there an element to large language models and deep learning in particular where we don't know how it works? We just know that it does. We're even talking about the architects of AI. We're talking about the godfather of AI, who admits that there are just certain levels of how this stuff works that we can't comprehend and we don't understand, and we're not entirely sure how it works or why it works as well as it does.
So then what do we need to get out of open source? I think it's the transparency into how these models are trained, right? What goes into them. But I tend to agree with you, Jason. We may never know how it works to an extent, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was even was it Anthropic? I can't remember. Somebody published a paper last year trying to mathematically prove how the black box outputted things based on what went into it. And the ultimate conclusion was, we don't friggin' know. Like, I mean, that wasn't the scientific conclusion. That was my interpretation of the conclusion. But it was basically just saying, you know what? Does anybody really look inside a hot dog that they buy at Yankee Stadium, or do they just bite into it with lots of mustard and ketchup on it and enjoy it, right? Like, I mean, if we're to believe the raccoons from Great Outdoors, there's nothing but lips and assholes in those things, yet everybody eats them.
You're making me hungry now. Now I'm like, I need to go to Yankee Stadium and get me another hot dog.
You have an open invitation, right? I think the three of us all have that in common.
Yes.
We would love to get together for a game. So
we will be getting together for a game very soon. Yes.
I look forward to that. So here's my thoughts, right? When I look at the definition of open source, and David, I think you hit the nail on the head. They're trying to take AI and generative AI and conform it to a pre-existing definition of open source without understanding that, number one, again, my opinion only, AI is not another IT application. It is a whole different category. And number two, it can cause way more damage than, like, for example, somebody getting access to a Linux kernel. I mean, so I think about this, and it's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night.
So you're saying that you think they had no business trying to throw this definition out?
I think that we need a definition of open source AI, but I think that they, like so many businesses, did not treat AI with the respect of it being what it is, that they are trying to mold it and conform it into an existing set of constructs. We see it with AI governance in business. We see it with AI risk and compliance. We see it with AI security. And now we're seeing it with AI open source, right?
And we see it with the Gartner hype cycle.
A great example.
The hype is never going to fall, y'all. It's going to keep going up and up and up. We're not going to do the standard Gartner hype cycle. Anyway, so I digress.
So as a CTO, David, and as a builder of businesses, as a serial entrepreneur, as somebody that looks at technology and kind of tries to figure out the future, for Crushbank and whatever ventures come next for you. How do you see these things playing out for businesses? Because like we're seeing between OpenClaw and now, the new Opus models that can do fully agentic personal systems, like I can almost with a zero-shot prompt build a full construct for a self-service and support application for myself. What's going to happen? Do you think that people are going to do that as a hobby and still rely on MSPs and other businesses for the real stuff? Or do you think that companies are going to have to just innovate even more aggressively to stay ahead of the curve of consumer accessible capabilities?
I think it'll be a little bit of both. I think early on, a lot of people will dive into the end of, hey, I think I can just do this myself. I'm going to throw a couple of prompts in there and I'm going to build a new CRM application because I don't want to pay for Salesforce licenses anymore, for example, right? That's an extreme example, but you get the point. So I do think there'll be a lot of that. I do think people will fail on that. But by the same token, maybe these models will get better, right? We talked about the new Claude model 4.8 released today. From what I read, was that the biggest improvement was around vibe coding. So I do think that is an area that is not going away, right? People will continue to do that. I think the 20% stock correction in all these companies, because SaaS was dead, I think that was overblown. I think that there will be a piece of that, though. There'll be a component of that. These companies will have to adapt. I'll tell you a very quick, funny story that's along the same lines to get a laugh out of it. So I saw an announcement on LinkedIn today from a tech that used to work for me back at my old company that he had released a new product that he had been building on his own. It looked very cool. And there was a link to the GitHub repo. So I clicked on the GitHub repo and there were 3 contributors, him, someone else I didn't know, and Claude. So he clearly vibe coded this. And I'm like, who the hell would put that as a contributor? That's a whole other story. So that is not going away by any means. I think you made a good point that I want to circle back to, though. In a way, I think AI needs to be taken out of the hands of IT at these organizations. They are not equipped to handle it. They don't know how it works. They don't understand it. That being said, I don't know where to put it, right? It doesn't go in finance or legal or marketing. So
I have thoughts there.
All right, well, I'd love to hear them because the smart businesses will need an AI department, right? If they're going to do it right, that's the only way to do it. But I think the biggest problem, what I'm trying to get to here, is that if you keep AI in the hands of IT, we will continue to get people trying to force AI into traditional IT definitions that it is not meant for, that it is not built for, and that will cause potential disaster.
Well, AI is not something that can be left in IT because AI affects everything. AI is at the executive level. It has to be in its own area. You can't put it just in the CTO or the CIO's province because really the breadth and scope of what AI is going to do spans the CMO's world, spans the executive VP of sales world or the CRO world, spans the CIO's world, the CSOs, the COOs. And so you're talking about a position that really has its finger in the pie of every other department, the equivalent of a CEO. So how are you going to take something that's going to have the reach and the breadth of the CEO and just keep it in IT? You just can't do it. This is what's giving rise to the fractional chief artificial intelligence officer position, of which I do. This is kind of why people like me who do consulting even exist, because people are starting to finally come around to the fact that artificial intelligence can't be hidden in one department because it needs to benefit all the other departments. And they don't know that they want to hire somebody full-time to be that chief artificial intelligence officer because you're talking about a full C-suite person. So, hey, let's go hire a fractional chief artificial intelligence officer. But to your earlier point about AI awareness, building your own software simply because vibe coding is so good and so popular, I did have one thing that I wanted to interject there. Human beings have been specializing since the Dark Ages and before. We're talking the Neanderthal ages, all right? You had somebody who was really good at using a hammer and a chisel to make stone wheels, and you had somebody else who built the best fires, and you had somebody else who knew how to gut this animal so that you got the best skin for your clothing. This is when you're dealing with low technology areas. Specialization helped everybody in everything. What is SaaS? It's just specialized software built and constructed in a way that is already packaged and ready for you to use. The fact that you can vibe code means that you're going to be able to replace some of that functionality, but not all of it. And there's going to be certain things that are really difficult and complex that are very unique to that particular area of expertise that you're just not going to be able to easily vibe code. It comes down to an efficiency play. Does it make sense for me to vibe code something and then have to maintain that thing from that point forward? Which is going to be a whole additional investment because you're having to maintain that thing, fix bugs, upgrade, add additional features, remove other features. You've suddenly become a full R&D department just by virtue of the fact that you tried to introduce a self-built or vibe-coded product inside your walls. There's a lot of companies that don't want to do that. There's always going to be a need for SaaS companies. The need may be reduced because some of the earlier, or not earlier, but some of the easier use cases can be handled by vibe coding, but that doesn't do away with the fact that the highly specialized stuff is still going to need specialization.
Yeah, and I think we're still early on in that process. Your point is dead on, meaning that people will start to realize, oh, I can't maintain this application, or what's going to be the watershed moment, a mass slew of vulnerabilities in software because people don't bother to put security checks in place when they vibe code something. Like something bad's going to happen, for lack of a better word, and maybe people will start to wake up. My concern, honestly, is that this stuff is happening under the waves, right? Shadow AI, like we talked about, like you don't know what is going on inside your organization. It's almost too easy to introduce these things into an enterprise without all the proper guardrails in place.
Well, you're absolutely right. Shadow AI is going to just get worse and worse and worse. It just simply is by the the nature of it.
I will tell you, and you're dead on about it. I'm glad we were able to pivot to talk about the chief AI role, which is great. I was going to ask you how many companies, you guys are out in the real world, how many companies do you know that have a CAIO? Like, I don't know of any. Like, maybe you know of a few, and obviously, Jason, there's companies you're working with.
Well, there's a lot of the larger companies that are, we're talking enterprise.
Yeah.
Even to the small enterprise level now, that are starting to either combine that with the CIO, CTO, so that individual is kind of doing it on a part-time basis, or they're creating a specific CIO type role. Not all of them are doing it in the wise way and elevating it to the C-suite level where it should be, which is unfortunate because they're still having themselves handcuffed a little bit by the reporting structure, and that's ineffective for the business. But it's starting to happen. And really, mid-market businesses and below now, even to some certain small businesses, they are recognizing, oh my gosh, I need somebody who can look at my business as a whole, like the CEO does, and be able to figure out how AI can help everybody and put things in order. This is the whole reason for ideation, the whole reason for strategy, roadmap creation, the whole reason for readiness assessments. Can you really make sure that your company is ready as an entire enterprise just from within this small little corner of IT? You just can't do it because you have to deal with not only technology readiness, but cultural readiness as well. That's a big deal.
Yeah. I will say I do see a lot more CDAIOs. So like a kind of a joint chief data, chief AI officer position. So maybe not necessarily a discrete chief AI officer, but they're acknowledging the need for it, but they're not necessarily carving out a separate position for it. So it's a little bit of a middle ground. And I can see why you would merge the two, because what you need to know as a chief data officer is similar from a protections and a configuration use case perspective as what you need to know for a chief AI officer. But it is a point well taken. And I'll just ask you one quick follow on for that. So Mustafa Suleiman had given a TED talk about AI needing to be regarded as a new and separate digital species. And I use this quote a lot in a lot of talks I've given over the past year and a half. And the concept is it doesn't belong in HR, it doesn't belong in IT, but it uses resources from both. It interacts with people and systems from both. And so we need to acknowledge this difference, this variance, and treat it as something fundamentally new instead of trying to conform an existing box to fit it in. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, is that the right answer?
It probably is, but I'll tell you what I personally think the problem is. So I spent more time in small to mid-sized businesses really than large enterprises. That's just kind of how my career has evolved. And two things that I know to be true. One is that, especially back when I was in the managed services world, if something plugged in or turned on, it was up to IT to support it, right? Whether it was the computer, the phone system, copy machine, or, I don't know.
Coffee maker.
Right, exactly. Coffee maker. Hopefully that mentality is starting to change. That sounds like that's more along the lines of what you said. The other side of that coin, though, is that as much as IT complains about it, I think it's going to be hard. You're going to have to pull AI out of their cold, dead hands. And what I mean about that, I say that for two reasons. A, it's the most high profile initiative in any business right now, right? Like, how are we leveraging AI as a business? IT is going to want to be involved with that. And when I say IT, I'm talking like top to bottom from the stack. The other piece is, quite frankly, and you touched on it a little bit, IT is becoming a little bit obsolete. Like, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Like, we're not managed services, IT support, help desk. It's not dead yet. It is probably on a glide path, though. And I think as people see the writing on the wall, I see it in managed services, right? Like my former company and a bunch of my clients and a bunch of colleagues, they don't know how to get professional services engagements because once you move someone to the cloud, there's really nothing else to do, right? So they're looking for AI projects. And hopefully they're doing it right and they're bringing in AI resources and they're doing all those things. But I just think IT is going to try and hold on to that for dear life because that is going to be their salvation, as opposed to becoming a small commoditized department in a larger company that has a mature, robust AI infrastructure.
Well, and there's another aspect to this, and this is what we can close on. So let me just add this aspect really quick. Right now, most of the budget going towards AI is coming out of IT's budget.
Exactly.
That is what's happening in the vast majority of companies all over the place. So no wonder IT is wanting to hold on to AI, because you break that away, suddenly they're left with a much reduced budget, not just a much reduced area of governance and things that they're in charge of. So, but I do think we probably should wrap this up. David, one last question I would ask you: if you had any advice to give to business owners that may not necessarily have started their AI journey very deeply, or they're getting ready to figure out where they want to go, what is that advice you would give them, specifically because you're so involved at the data layer? What is that advice that you would give these business owners that are starting to forge into this great new world of AI?
So I would say a couple of things. The first one on the actual AI side would be just to start, right? Get yourself a subscription, get a Claude, get a ChatGPT license, $20 a month, and just every time you go to do something, ask the AI to help you with it, whether it's to write something or to script something or to summarize something, whatever. Just get started, just work alongside. You will notice from what I've seen over time that the amount of workload that you start to shift to it will grow gradually and then exponentially, right? So that's the first piece, just get started. As an enterprise, as a business, I think, again, this is my company, so obviously I have a perspective. The data is the most important part of your AI journey as a business. So the other piece I would do is I would start an effort, whether it's internal, whether you work with a consultant, your MSP, whoever it is, start cataloging and understanding what data you have in your organization, what it is, where it lives, how do you access it, and who owns it. And just literally start cataloging that, because once you understand what AI can do, you'll very quickly want to put your data as part of that solution. And if you start planning for that, it'll make that significantly easier.
And that, I think, is the perfect place to end this episode of AI Diatribe. David, thank you for joining us today. Your knowledge is broad and expansive and very valuable. So we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom.
I appreciate you guys having me on. This was a blast.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's this edition of AI Diatribe. We appreciate your time and attention, and we'll see you next time.